Imagine waking up one morning and discovering you're a trillionaire. Literally, you check your bank account and there it is. Trillions of dollars. You're richer than Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Bill Gates combined. But here's the problem. You can't afford breakfast. A loaf of bread costs $300 billion. 3 eggs cost 100 trillion. Your life savings can't buy a single chicken. This isn't science fiction. This isn't a nightmare. This actually happened in Zimbabwe. Between 2007 and 2009, an entire nation became trillionaires and starved at the same time. This is the story of what happens when money dies. Welcome to the Gray Truth, where money, power, and history collide. Let's rewind. Because Zimbabwe wasn't always like this. In fact, Zimbabwe used to be called the breadbasket of Africa. In the 1980s and 90s, it was one of the most prosperous nations on the continent. They exported food to neighboring countries. They had stable currency, a functioning economy. Middle-class families owned homes, cars, sent their kids to school. The Zimbabwean dollar was actually worth more than the US dollar at one point. So, what happened? How does a nation go from prosperity to everyone being a trillionaire who can't afford eggs? The answer starts with one man, Robert Mugabe. Mugabe became Zimbabwe's leader in 1980 after the country gained independence from Britain. At first, things were good. The economy grew. Infrastructure improved. Education expanded. But power, as they say, corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. By the late 1990s, Mugabe had been in power for nearly 20 years and his grip was slipping. War veterans who fought for independence were demanding compensation. The economy was weakening. People were getting restless. So in 2000, Mugabe made a decision that would destroy everything. Land reform. Now, here's the context. During colonial rule, white farmers, who made up less than 1% of the population, owned most of the productive farmland. That's a real injustice. Redistribution made sense in principle, but Mugabe didn't do it carefully. He didn't do it gradually. He seized farms violently, often giving land to political allies who had no farming experience. Commercial farms that had fed the nation for decades were abandoned or mismanaged. Production collapsed. Food exports became food imports. And the government, watching tax revenues disappear, panicked. So they did what desperate governments always do when they run out of money. They printed more debt at first. It was manageable. A little inflation. Prices went up, but not catastrophically. But inflation is like a slow-moving avalanche. Once it starts, it's almost impossible to stop. By 2003, inflation hit 100%. That means prices doubled every year. Your salary, your savings, everything lost half its value annually. But the government kept printing. They needed to pay soldiers, civil servants, and political loyalists, so they printed more money, and inflation got worse. By 2006, inflation was over 1,000%. Prices were doubling every few weeks. Then it accelerated. By 2007, inflation wasn't just high. It was exponential. Prices weren't doubling every month. They were doubling every week, then every few days, then every single day. At its peak in November 2008, Zimbabwe's inflation rate hit 79.6 billion% per month. Let me repeat that. 79.6 billion% per month. Prices doubled every 24 hours. Sometimes faster. If you bought bread in the morning for $10 million, by evening it cost $20 million. By the next morning, $40 million. By the end of the week, billions. It was financial insanity. The government's response? Print bigger bills. They started with $100 notes, then $1,000, then $10,000, then dollar, 100,000, then millions, then billions, then trillions. In January 2009, Zimbabwe printed a $100 trillion bill. 100 trillion. That's a 1 with 14 zeros. It was the highest denomination currency ever officially printed by any nation in history. And you know what it could buy? Almost nothing. Maybe 3 eggs if you were lucky. Maybe a loaf of bread. Maybe a single chicken. The bill itself, as a collector's item, is now worth more than it ever was as actual money. But here's the thing people don't Understand about hyperinflation. It's not just about prices going up. It's about society breaking down. Money is the foundation of modern civilization. It's how we measure value, coordinate activity, plan for the future. When money dies, everything else dies with it. Savings evaporated overnight. Pensions became worthless. Salaries meant nothing. Teachers, doctors, police officers, they all earned trillions of dollars that couldn't buy food. People stopped accepting the currency. They demanded US dollars, South African rand, or barter. Shops closed. Factories shut down. Supply chains collapsed. And people, millions of people, started starving. So what was daily life like in Zimbabwe during hyperinflation? Imagine going to the grocery store with a wheelbarrow full of cash. Not a wallet, not a bag, a wheelbarrow. Because you needed literal bricks of bills to buy basic items. People would joke that it was safer to leave the money and steal the wheelbarrow. Because the wheelbarrow was worth more. ATMs had withdrawal limits not in dollars, but in how many bills the machine could physically hold. You withdraw the maximum, millions or billions of dollars, and it still wasn't enough for groceries. Workers got paid multiple times a day because money lost value so fast. You get your morning wages, run to the store immediately. Buy what? You could, then come back for your afternoon wages. Prices changed while you were shopping. You put items in your cart, get to the checkout, and the price had increased. Restaurants stopped printing menus because prices changed too fast. They'd write them on chalkboards and update every few hours. Some shops just stopped using Zimbabwean dollars entirely. They'd only accept foreign currency or goods for barter. Eggs for soap, chickens for medicine. It was medieval economics in the 21st century, and the cruelty of it was that everyone was a trillionaire. Literally, your bank account had trillions. You carried trillions in your pocket, but you were broke. Poorer than you'd ever been in your life. Old people who'd saved for retirement watched their life savings become worthless. A pension that could have bought a house now couldn't buy a loaf of bread. Middle-class families who'd worked for decades lost everything. Not because of war, not because of natural disaster, but because the government destroyed the currency. It was theft on a national scale, silent, invisible, devastating. The psychological toll was immense. People stopped planning for the future. Because there was no future, you couldn't save money. You couldn't invest. You could barely survive day to day. Teachers stopped teaching because their salaries were worthless. Doctors left the country. Skilled workers fled to South Africa, Botswana, anywhere with a functioning economy. Hospitals ran out of medicine. Schools closed. Infrastructure crumbled. And the government, the same government that caused all of this, just kept printing money and pretending everything was fine. By 2008, unemployment was over 80%. Agricultural production had collapsed by more than 50% from the 1990s. Life expectancy dropped. Child mortality increased. Millions fled the country as refugees. And the $100 trillion bill, that absurd piece of paper with 14 zeros, became the symbol of a nation that had destroyed itself financially. So how did it end? In 2009, Zimbabwe did something almost unprecedented. They abandoned their own currency entirely. The Zimbabwean dollar was officially discontinued. Instead, the government allowed people to use foreign currencies, US dollars, South African rand, British pounds, anything but their own money. Overnight, inflation stopped. Not because they fixed the economy, but because they admitted defeat and switched to someone else's money. It was the ultimate surrender. A nation giving up on its own currency. And here's the bitter irony. Once they stopped printing Zimbabwean dollars, the economy stabilized. Shops reopened, prices stopped changing every hour. People could plan again. Which proves that the hyperinflation wasn't some mysterious economic curse. It was a choice. A series of terrible decisions made by a government that prioritized political survival over economic sanity. They destroyed their currency to stay in power. And millions of ordinary people paid the price. But Zimbabwe isn't unique. This pattern has happened throughout history. Weimar Germany in the 1920s, Hungary in 1946, Yugoslavia in the 1990s, Venezuela in the 2010s. The details change. The countries change. But the story is always the same. A government runs out of money, starts printing to cover debts, inflation spirals out of control, and the currency dies. Economists even have a term for it, the death spiral of fiat currency. Once people lose faith in money, it's almost impossible to restore. And here's the lesson that every person, every government, every nation should learn. Money is trust. That's all it is. A dollar bill, a euro, a yen, they're just pieces of paper or digital numbers. They only have value because we collectively agree they have value. We trust that tomorrow, that piece of paper will buy roughly what it bought yesterday. The moment that trust breaks, the moment people believe their money will be worthless tomorrow, the system collapses. And no amount of printing can fix it. Because you can't print trust. Zimbabwe tried. They printed $100 trillion bills. They made everyone a trillionaire, and people still starved. Because inflation isn't about the amount of money. It's about the value of money. And when the value goes to zero, you can have all the trillions in the world and still have nothing.